Hello there everybody and welcome to a new video for Age of Wonders 4. In this one I got a new build for you featuring the Tome of Evolution from the Dragon Dawn DLC and animals. It is a wild combo, it works surprisingly well, and here I'm rocking it with the Dark Culture because of many synergies, but I can see this working with other cultures as well. We're going to go over all the moving parts over the course of the video. There's timestamps down below, so let's get started with the racial and the social stuff. So I went for runesmiths because, runesmiths are just, when you go for a lot of unit enchantments, the best thing to pick up. It makes them faster to research, it makes them cheaper, so there's only goodness in here. Also, you gain access to your tier 2 units from the get-go because dark polearms are tier 2 and they don't have any shields, so you can totally choose them. The Chosen Uniters trait here was what I went with, mostly because of me liking to go for Vassal playstyle whenever I play Dark Culture. You have a little bit of extra diplomatic pressure with that, and I really like to play that. But I can see many different things working out here, so choose to your own liking. This build is very, very flexible in terms of, well, freedom of these things. What I totally can see working here very, very well, though, would be the trait for cheaper summons from the Astral Tree, because we can actually summon a lot of creatures with this one, and while I am now sitting on a huge pile of mana, most of the time of this run I really didn't because of the Dragon Ruler, and let's just say Dragon Rulers are really hungry and mana. Okay, so that's what I went for with the culture. Like I said, feel free to swap out the Chosen Uniters. I personally just love Vassal income extra, and the extra polearm unit from the beginning is also very spicy. Now, body and mind traits. I went for wolf mounts. Several reasons. Pack Hunter is just so amazingly good with any animal build, and the Dark Culture can totally utilize the Enfeebling Howl as well, because they go off of any weakening. They get a extra damage bonus and regeneration. The wonderful part about the synergy here is that your animals will be able to inherit the Cold Weak trait as well, so they will deal more damage to weakened units and start regenerating when they hit weakened units. So basically, wolves are good because they hit harder right next to animals, and they also have the ability to get your damage bonuses going. So the other trait I picked up here was Overwhelm Tactics. It has a reason because we're going hard into critical hit chance with that build. You could go for other things here, but this is one of the things that you need to pick up if you want to maximize your critical hit chance, which I can totally recommend. You won't regret, promise. So let's head on over to the tome section. We go at the beginning, like you would have assumed, with the Tome of Evolution. It offers so many good things for the Dark Culture start. For one, we have a healing skill that actually happens to strengthen your units, and while none of your baseline roster units do evolve, it gives you the ability to support your squishy start a little bit more. Also, you have the Slither Hatchling and the Wyvern Fledgling, and as soon as you have Rapid Evolution enchantment going, they will come back from the dead if you win the combat, and they will evolve faster. So, in a nutshell, this tome, once you have these three spells together, you have your army ready. You just need to forge them, you just need to put the spell on, and then you can just throw away your Slither Hatchlings and your Wyvern Fledglings every fight, and you don't need to worry about them dying at all, because they just come back as long as you win. This is a super synergistic way of rocking the early game with the Dark Culture, because, they really, really excel when they can work with expendable units. Here you have them for free, basically, right from the get-go. Don't forget to pick up Shepherd. If you'd happen to have the support skills left over, it's really powerful for those little critters. And Draconic Vitality, more HP per rank, yes please, but quite often I just don't have the capacity to research it. It's a pretty good one though. The other tome to pick up is the Tome of Beasts, of course, because we're rocking the Animal Kingdom. Animal Kinship will start to give you bonuses when your units start to be adjacent to animals or cavalry. That's a good start. And we get the ability to summon wild animals, and we also can recruit the wild animals out of the wildlife sanctuary. The wild speaker is something to get your hands on as quick as possible, because this guy can summon yet another animal every combat. Another throwaway unit that you can revolve around to minimize your losses. And Unleash the Beast is an amazing skill, because killing momentum gives you another action when you get a takedown, and it is a very, very powerful buff that you can apply to all the animals that you summon. Also, these guys are nowadays always mounted, so they can apply the enfeebling howl as well to proc off the Call of the Weak. Really good stuff. And last but not least, Call of the Wild will become a spell that stays viable until the very, very late stages of the game, because higher defenses and a little bit more strength for all of your animals and cavalries is just nothing to say no to. Never, ever. And don't forget to pick a pack leader, because it's just another nice little critical hit bonus. And, you know, support heroes are really good for this build, if you haven't already noticed. So, Marcus Prey, by the way, is something that you can use, but most of the time you won't use. It is really useful, though, if you happen to have super hard targets, but it didn't happen to me any time in between, to be honest. So, the second tier, we start out with Tome of Fertility. The Nymph supporter is giving us the backbone for the longer fights. We gain access to regeneration for 1 hex radius. It's also a negative status purger, really, really amazingly valuable. And most importantly, we gain Seduce, which is basically a good chance to turn the enemy to our units, which I personally love, and their basic attack isn't too weak either. Animate Flora is an amazing thing. You can just turn the nature into units, and what I personally love about this one, the Floral Stinger you summon comes with 3 action points. So if the enemy happens to just stand right next to stuff that you can animate, you can totally wreak havoc upon their backline with that one. I love this spell alone for that. Temple of Fertility is pretty good for the dark culture. I was surprised about it, but since the dark culture doesn't get any drawbacks of negative city stability, more population transforms into a bonus here, and draft is a valuable resource always. So restore the lands, well, I don't use that too much. I don't see the use of that in this build, but Blossom of Life, 2 hex radius, 3 regeneration. This is, from this tome on, you should feel already pretty overpowered already, but we're only starting here, basically. Bountiful Fields, if you happen to have a lot of farms, you can transform them into draft, but I rarely use this special province improvement, in all honesty. You have the opportunity, though, to pick up Revitalize for your heroes as well. It's pretty neat. So the other tier 2 tome, Artificing. So this might come a little bit as a surprise, but this thing offers what we need. For 1, Artisan Armaments, 30% critical hit chance for our animals. After this one, we will be around 60 to 70% or 80 even, depending on your support skills. This is massive, and this is, by the way, the reason why I picked Overwhelm Tactics, because of 20% more critical hit chance. You will really notice how hard your critters will hit from that. The other thing here in this build, the Iron Golem. He is a really, really amazing buddy for your frontline needs. The Dark Culture can sometimes lack a little bit of frontline, and the Iron Golem can just soak up so much physical damage. They're a little bit weak on the magical side, but they are immune against negative status thingies, so they are really, really decent buff receivers. Siege Magic comes in quite handy to buff up your supporters. Don't underestimate this one. You rock quite a lot of supporters in this one. It's more damage for them, and most importantly, they get to do fortification damage, which can be outright amazing. Also, they can demolish reinforced obstacles, but the other things here, Bolt Repeaters and Artisan Fortification, I don't see them as the big sales points of these books. of this book. It's mostly about artisan armaments, siege magic, and the Iron Golem. Golem Mine, though, is really amazing for the Darks again, because they happen to rock a lot of quarries, and the Iron Golem you can get is a nice icing on the cake. Golem Assistant is also a really cool support skill because, again, throwaway units. I've been over that topic a lot already. So when we hit the tier 3 area, of course, Tome of Vigor comes as the first thing to pick up. It's full of goodness. Greater Animal gives you the ability to summon the biggest and meanest critters on Earth. Totem of the Wild gives you 3 summons. It's pretty costly, but it's so darn powerful. Unleash Beast can turn one of your animal units into a beast, like the name implies. Just watch out for the Berserk, but it's really good if you have a summon that's going to expire in 2 turns anyway. And Empowered Beasts, this is good. 20% more damage for your animals, more HP, Demolisher. It's just so good. From this point on, your animals will go crazy with all the crits they do. And Super Growth is just a nice little extra for your own units, but keep in mind, doesn't apply to animals. It's not nearly as interesting as for many builds, because my experience with that build was that 2/3 of my armies tended to be animals, and on the battlefield with all the summons, it's even more than 3/4. So these enchantments aren't nearly as useful as for other builds. But Animal Handler, please pick this up if you can. The extra magical resistance is so big, and mind control immunity is always nice to have. Last but not least, we pick up Tome of Devastation. Mostly because of flame burst weapons. Here we have the point, if you have enough support stuff going on, you have hit successfully 100% critical hit chance. Also, the enemy will happen to explode when the enchanted units smack them. This is already so good. I love this trick. Focus of Devastation gives, again, your supporters a nice little trick. They can cancel enemies' defense modes. It is not a go-to thing, but it can be really handy in the late game, because the AI tends to be quite smartish with their defense modes. Gives you a good offer strike in general, but not much more than that. Don't overfocus this. The Unleash the Warhounds siege project, though, is amazing for this build. You gain Warhounds, and guess what? They're animals, so they come with a lot of benefits on your build. That comes as a really nice upgrade for this spell. Also, the Warbreed is really amazing. It's good. If you want to stack up some tier 4 unit, just do so. But you will not happen to have too much need of these, because Summon Greater Animal usually provides plenty of army stuff. And after that, well, you are so free to go wherever you please. Affinity-wise, you have only access to the tier 4 nature tomes, and the rest is affinity-wise locked for you. I want to point out that Tome of the Dragons is also an amazing pick for this one, because the dragon evolution here, well, it's just tier 5 units that you can create, and that build can do quite decently. Also, most of the units here, like the wyvern that you can hire, are also animals while being dragons, so there is also a synergy. I'm not fully aware if these dragons here count as animals too, but I wouldn't be too surprised. I haven't had time to try that out, I'm sorry about that. Purifying Flame is an amazing spell out of this tome, totally worth picking it up. It is the first burst heal. Before that, you would only have regeneration, and Flamer focus is a little bit lost on this build. Just don't pick it because we don't have any battle mages. It's a bit of a tragedy, but it is as it is. You can get Draconian Transformation, but again, it is not nearly as interesting as for other cultures. The Dragon and the Purifying Flame are the major interesting points behind that. The Wyvern Eyrie is also pretty interesting, but all in all, I thought the Devastation Tome was way more interesting than that. So the Nature tier 4 tomes are very straightforward. I personally think Nature's Wrath is a little bit more interesting, because Awaken Instincts is just a very nice finisher. You gain access to something to create forests. You gain access to something to spawn an animal and plant army. And Devolve is also really, really interesting as it stuns or devolves a unit into something way less useful. Powerful spell. Very, very powerful spell. On top of that, we gain the Horned God. He's really right now, well, the Living Wines will get fixed soon, but Animate Flora as a skill on cooldown is amazing. Goes really well with this build. And you can pick up Tome of Paradise, but Gaia's Chosen is again, like I said, pretty nice for your units, but not for your animals. So this book has surprisingly low interest, has a surprisingly low amount of interesting things here. The Exhilarating Pollen, though, is not necessary because we already have 100% crit at some point, or at least 90%. The distraction is coming in quite handy, but again, other builds profit from that way more. The Blessing of Paradise is really cool because you can rack up a lot of city stability with this build if you'd like to. But again, here, this is just a filler. The Goddess of Nature thing has, again, lots of animal buffing. If you have Force of Nature going, you are well beyond critical hit chance. It's just nuts. In all honesty, my games felt very over once I hit the first tier 3 tomes. So let's move on over to the military aspect. So when you go for setting up your military, your baseline units are basically the least interesting of the bunch. You will only have the Pursuers and the Dark Warriors in your roster as long as you have to, because animals are just always the better pick for this build. What you really want to have, though, are Wild Speakers. They are your bread and butter. They are wolves, so they can weaken the enemy, they can conjure more animals, and they're really good. The other really valuable unit from your baseline roster are Warlocks, because they work as our weakeners. They happen to have a little bit of a burst, which can lower the enemy's resistances, and they are really good company to what we already got. You can use the archers, of course, but I'd not recommend you to do this too much. The baseline strategy is very simple. You try to get the rapid the rapid evolution enchantment here going, and then you try to pump out as many wyverns and slithers as you can, and from that point on, you are really able to just roll over the enemy, back it up with whatever you find, but don't rely too much on the Pursuers. I was a little bit underwhelmed by their performance in this build. The Warlocks were way more useful for me. Even though they had the Wolves, you don't want these guys in the vicinity of enemies, therefore they just melt if they have enemies in their vicinity. So do Wild Speakers, but at the end of the day, they are tier 2 units, and ultimately, you want to have the Dark Knight close to the enemy, because this guy is actually the go-to guy. So, enough about that. As soon as you have the ability to summon wild animals, you can either summon them via the spell if you happen to have the mana, or you build a wildlife reserve and you can recruit units. The units you can recruit, I recommend Gore Tusk Piglets because they can evolve, so they are just available, and Hunter Spiders. They can evolve into Hunter Spider Matriarchs, and these guys are brutal. They are so brutal. They can jump and spit a web and get all the bonuses from the Animal Kingdom, and they have that resurgence thing until they transform into a freaking tier 4 spider that's just ready to wreak havoc upon your enemies. These guys are worth building the animal reserve so much for this build. They are really, really good. The other units you can recruit here in the wildlife reserve are sadly not so synergistic for this build, because you really want to have that resurgence thing going on as much as you can. When you're summoning wild animals, you also get other stuff. What's always good to have if you get them, any form of spider hatchling, because all of them will evolve into matriarchs. They are very, very powerful for this build. Also, caustic worms, stuff like these. Worms are really cool because they are shock units. I mean, sure, you have as the dark culture guy, you have native access to that, but you know, it's nice to get that as well. The Serpents, though, on the other hand, are totally not interesting because they stay tier 2 forever and they are not too powerful. With this build, it's really important that you tailor your military roster around evolving units, and you have so many of them to choose from. It's amazing. I love this build for what it does. Also, have some wild speakers. I recommend 3 in the beginning. With this, you can totally dominate the battlefields and fill it up with whatever you get. A honorable mention goes to the Night Guard as a filler upper in the early game, but you will replace these guys again with other stuff. The only guys out of your baseline roster that stay interesting are the Dark Knight and the Warlock, in my opinion. The rest of these can be all replaced with animals, and should be replaced with animals, as a matter of fact, in my opinion. Okay, let's move on over to the strategy pod. Since we do go for a dragon ruler, you start out with a 1 dragon army. So I went here for a nature frame because you get that stupidly overpowered nature aura, which gives your dragon ruler regeneration. I leave it up to you how far you want to take it. This guy is able to kill off 3 doom stacks or 3 armies of enemies all on his own with the summoning and the stuff we got. So that's pretty interesting in that regard. If you don't want to power play like that, you can totally pick up the dragon and let him roam around with your regular doom stack. But you can totally have 2 armies at once with this build. No biggie. Absolutely possible. You want to expand as fast as possible, and you want to have as many cities as possible. This build is very, very straightforward and easy to play because it doesn't need much, and it just gets so powerful on itself so quickly. Basically, as soon as you have access to your 2 tier 1 tomes and a couple of wild speakers and some mana, you are set to conquer the world. It is that stupid. Try to get yourself, as quick as possible, a decent army and start terrorizing your neighborhood. Try to focus into getting as many costly units as you can afford, and keep upgrading your army. The really powerful part about this build is all of the bigger parts in your build can be summoned. This is amazing. You gain access to the nymphs in tier 2, you can summon them to the front line, so you can have supporters without returning back to your city. You gain access to the greater animal, so you can just fill up the units that weren't interesting anymore with something more powerful and send the rest back to defending cities or whatever. So this is one major advantage. Just from time to time, you will have to replace some of the losses that can weaken units. You always need weakeners for this build because 2 things. You want to go as quick as possible into Brand of Wrath, because this way all your animal, or most of your animal units that fill into these roles, will have Call the Weak, because that makes your animals 20% stronger and they will start regenerating whenever they whack a weakened unit. Therefore, Baneful Curse is one of your most important things. If you ever happen to have not the ability to have archers, warlocks, or whatever in the vicinity, this is your go-to thing. But since you have wolves and whatnot available, you can do a lot of shenanigans around that. So overall, my impression was, after hitting tier 2 Tome of Fertility, I didn't know what should have stopped me anymore, because it is so easy to cheese the combats with constant resupplies of summons. I would therefore recommend you strongly to keep your combat casting points reserved for either buffing your units or summoning new stuff. Summoning new stuff is important in really large combats, whereas buffing is important to mitigate your losses in smaller scale combats. When we want to talk about the Empire affinities, I want to point out that we have access to Materium. Materium has been buffed. I think that Master Masons with 20% cheaper buildings and Arcane Artisans are must-haves nowadays. Mines granting mana, you usually go heavier for quarries with the Dark Culture, but this is just so good to pay for all the magical units that you want to have. In the Shadow department, pick up Knowledge Extraction because it's just, you know, it's a power card. and it's one of those things that you have access to because you are dark culture, period. And since I go here with this build for the Chosen Uniters, All Seeing is super powerful, combined with Court of Whispers. This gives you super early access to a lot of knowledge if you'd want to. The order aspect here, ignore that. I picked that up illegally by leveling up my my dragon like that and hiring some heroes. You will have access though to the entire nature branch. You might notice here I haven't picked up anything, but if you have the Imperium left, I haven't had the Imperium this run most of the time. The Spirit Wolf one is amazing for this build because, you know, it's an animal, it comes back. Do I need to say more? I don't think so. Wild Expansion is also a super powerful thing. Basically, from that point on, you will be able to overrun the entire map, and Natural Order is just really cool if you pick up something that can forestify the world. You can create a lot of city stability, and surprisingly, you can make very, very happy dark cities with this build. The other things here, fruitful integration and military engineering, allow you to expand stupidly fast, and all in all, this build is amazing in what it does. I want to point out here, if you don't want to go for a magical victory and you just want to steamroll the map, feel free to pick up after you are done with your tier 3 tomes, just to skip the entire tier 4 route and just pick up things to make your units more powerful. You can go for several ways here, like picking up pyromancy or cryomancy. Just pick up things that make your units more powerful, or pick up stuff out of the order area to buff up your units or stun the enemy more or make them more vulnerable for stuns. If you want to just conquer the world, you don't have to go for tomes that you don't want to pick. And due to the nature of nature builds, pun not intended, I see myself ending up with stupidly many armies that can just overrun the world. This build is a tad bit oppressive and overpowered, just wanted to say. Especially if you happen to pull off the one dragon army thing, you can end up stupidly powerful way too quickly. Anywho, I hope you enjoyed this one. It's so much fun to play with animal armies. You end up with so many units you can just play around with and don't mind if you lose them. I love this for that, so I hope you guys will enjoy too. Leave me your comments down below. Let me know what kind of builds you'd like to see or what kind of videos you'd want me to do. And of course, consider subscribing and leaving a thumbs up would be also very, very nice. There's a playlist down there in the description box for all the other Age of Wonders 4 videos I did. And of course, I thank you so much for watching this, and see you guys next time. Bye-bye.